guys, it's Steph from Rendering This, and welcome to the VStitcher's Basics course. Today I get to teach you all about materials. Materials are so essential when building our 3D garments because without them, our garments wouldn't exist. Today we're going to cover our fabrics, our seams, our artworks, our trims, and how to recolor all of those. Let's go ahead and jump into our software. So on my screen I have my software open, and to load a file we are actually going to use Browzwear's import from cloud feature. To do so we're going to do File and then Import from Cloud. Import from Cloud is Browzwear's cloud library that has a bunch of assets that we can download and use. So you can see we have an animated avatar, some other avatars, we have our fashion snoops library, kids, men's, hangers, meshcapade, animated avatars, smart design files, and women's. So we can actually select any of these to utilize for our materials lesson. I'm going to go under the men's style and I am going to pick a button-up shirt because I want to talk a little bit about trims today also. So I'm going to scroll down until I can find that basic button shirt. And scrolling, here it is, this tailored shirt. I'm going to select it. And then on the upper right hand corner, I'm going to click the downloads button. These are all free assets to use, so definitely use them. They're a great way to get your hands on some files. It's going to say it's downloaded. Do I want to open it? I'm going to click yes, and it's going to load into my software. Now, just like all of our other files that are pre-created, we need to load a snapshot. So the snapshot's going to contain the avatar. So even though I have this faceless woman's avatar, when I click this drop down, I can see that there's the different size shirts that are saved as snapshots. So maybe I want the size 38. I can select that and I can see that that graded shirt is on a form. I can click a different snapshot and do 44. And I can see that there is a size 44 shirt on a size 44 avatar. If I go under this size drop down, I can see that there is an avatar size set that's linked to these garments. So I can see that the Atom size 42 is linked to the 42 shirt, and that the 40 is the base size. So whenever you're working with graded size sets, it's best practice to use your base size when doing any adjustments. Now that we have our snapshot loaded, we can go ahead and talk about our materials in our file. On the left-hand side of my screen, this toolbox right here that says 2D, materials, 3D, so forth, this can be expanded to be larger if you want by selecting that kind of side panel and dragging it. And what we're going to focus on today is this materials tab. When I select the materials tab, I have a sub-tab of garment and libraries. Your garment tab is going to be everything in your current file. So if I were to switch this file to a woman's t-shirt that I was working on, everything in this garments tab would be different because that's what's applied to that specific garment. If I toggle over to the library tab, this is different because it's our cloud library or any libraries we have imported into our software. And that's software specific, so this is never going to change unless you add or delete things. Now you do have access to different cloud libraries by going to this drop down. And in this drop down, I can see that I have Browzwear knits, seams and trims, special materials, wovens, and then also a bunch of their partners. So we have an Avery Dennison branding section, we have Cottonworks fabric. Scrolling all the way down, you can see that there's tons of different partners. You also have the option to add your own library by clicking this drop down and add library. To do that, you can have a folder of, let's say, artwork, a folder of materials that you may have had tested, a folder of anything that you can load into the software. And your software will always be able to pull the materials from that folder as long as you do not change the location of that folder. So you do need to make sure that if it's saved in your documents, you're not moving it from your documents to your desktop or vice versa, that you keep it in one place. Now in this materials section, under the libraries, I can download anything from these cloud libraries into my garment tab. So if I scroll down here, I can see that I have like an interlock fabric, a single jersey, Now, some of mine have clouds and some of them don't. The ones that do not means I've used them before. So my software is recognizing them. I don't need to re-download them, but I do need to click this plus sign to add them into my garment tab. Now the single jersey, maybe I've never used before. There's a cloud there. I can click that cloud and it's going to download and auto add it to my garment tab. So I click 2 fabrics, and when I go back over to the garment area, I can see that it is going to update for me momentarily to have those 2 fabrics in this area. Let's go check one more time, clicking those plus signs. There we go. So here is my fabric. I can see it's loaded here. Now, in this material side, there is only one fabric that's actually being used in my garment, and that has a gray check mark. These other 3 fabrics are in my software and loaded over here, but they're not actually in use. They're not applied anywhere on this garment. Before we start applying any sorts of fabrics, I do want to go over just a nice understanding of what a digital fabric is. Now, there are 2 parts to a digital fabric that you need to understand. The first part is going to be the physics of the fabric. Just like fabric in real life, our digital fabrics have stretch, they have bend, they have weight, and the way that this is captured is from the Browzwear fabric analyzer, or the fab machine. This takes 3 different strips of fabric from the length, the width, and the bias, and it's tested in this machine so that we can actually calculate the physics of that. So those physics are captured, and then they are paired with our digital maps, and that's what's going to create the material for us. In order to see the maps of your fabric, you'll go into the software and you will select one of your fabrics. So when I click on it, on the right-hand side, all the way over here, I can see my extension menu that is going to be showing me all of the different maps that create the imaging of our fabric. So in the upper right-hand corner, I can see the physics. So I can click that physics button, and then this is what was tested by the fab machine. And there is a verification here saying that it was tested, nothing was messed with. You can restore it from the database if you do end up changing any of these numbers. And I can change them if I want. If I want this to be a thicker fabric, I can change that, and it will update to have thicker physics in my garment. So underneath that, I can see the face and the back of my fabric. So the front and the back, a lot of times in our fabric, that is going to be different. I can toggle between them. I can choose to hide or show if I don't want to see the back of the fabric. I can also increase the transparency if I want to make it more or less transparent. And then underneath here is going to be my main maps. The first one we have is our diffuse map. The diffuse map is going to be the main image that was tested. There's a various amount of ways that you can get these images. You can go from anywhere of taking your iPhone and taking a flat lay image of that fabric, or you can use a really high-powered Visu scanner. You can use a flatbed printer. It's all going to depend on what quality of imaging you want for your materials. So this image right here, I can see that. That is just my base diffuse image. We also have a color chip next to it. So if I want to recolor this fabric, I'm able to select that color chip, and I am able to pick a new color from this picker, or I can toggle to my libraries and load in a color. We'll talk about color libraries in a little bit, but I have some auto-loaded in here that I could choose. So if I click the green, I can see it is now updated to green. The color blending is the way that this color is interacting with our diffuse image. So right now it's on overlay, and that is going to be defaulted to overlay. Think about this color chip being stacked over top or underneath of this gray image. Overlay will be placed over top of it so that that gray is coming through it. Multiply is being placed underneath so that the gray is coming, or the green is coming through the gray versus vice versa. And you can see it gets darker. So overlay, it's a bit brighter because it's sitting on top. Multiply, it's a little darker because it's sitting underneath. The last option is recolor, which is going to completely omit whatever color this scanned image is, and it's going to change it to that RGB value. Now there's a few other maps. There is alpha, there is specular, there is roughness and normal, also displacement, and then underneath there are some advanced options. There is metalness, specular tint, sheen, sheen tint, subsurface, clear coat, and clear coat roughness. Now I'm not going to go too in depth into these maps, as we will do a different lesson covering these because there's a lot of different things we can do with them. But just know that the different images that are loaded into these spots, as well as changing these sliders to a different degree, is going to change what your material looks like. And I will give you a quick example of that. I'm going to apply my fabric by just dragging and dropping it onto my garment. I can do that on the 2D side or the 3D side. And when I do that, I get this replace all option. So it's saying, do you want to replace all of the old Oxford shirting with this new interlock fabric? I do not, so I'm not going to click the replace all button. But I do need to click this update 3D. Update 3D is going to recalculate the dress and drape of this garment because we are changing the physics. We're adding a new fabric that has different physical properties. So when I click it, you can see that that drape is changing. It's either going to auto finish for me once it is done calculating all of that, but since we're demoing, I am just going to click that finish button for us for right now. Now that I have that fabric applied, I'm going to show you just how those maps really change how this fabric can look. When I select that fabric again, I'm going to get my extension menu, and I'm going to focus on this normal map here. The normal map's easy to remember because it's purple, and that is what is giving us a sense of texture. So there's not actual 3D texture. I'm not seeing the fabric actually, have bumps coming out of it, but it is giving me kind of the illusion of what this texture may look like. And we can get a really nice texture with bumps coming out of that, but we'd have to use that in tangent with the displacement map. Again, other things that we're going to get into in later lessons. With this normal map though, if I click this box, I have an option to replace it. So my current texture is one that, came with this fabric. It is the actual fabric texture. But let's say I wanted to get the texture of bricks on this fabric. I can click the replace button, and then in my downloads, I have one of bricks. And when I click open, you can see that now my fabric looks just like bricks. And this map that I got was just off Google. I Googled normal maps, and there's a ton of different normal maps that you can use to kind of give you a certain texture that you may want. I can scale this slider down or up, depending on how much texture I want to see. Again, this is a very powerful map. You can see how that changed my fabric with just one click. Also, if I wanted to, let's say, make these shiny bricks, I could increase my specular and decrease my roughness, and I'm now getting much shinier bricks as I move around. I could scroll down to metalness. Maybe I want metal-like bricks. So again, you can see these sliders are super powerful. Now, this wouldn't exactly be a fabric that I want to use in my garment. This is all just for test and show, so that again, you can see that the two components of this fabric is going to be our imaging, which consists of all of these maps to give us a really powerful visualization of what this fabric looks like, paired with our physics, which is going to be the exact and accurate drape of a physically real fabric. So just put into more of a digital, well, exactly what I said. It is a digital fabric. So those two togethers create that digital fabric for you. So I quickly went over how I applied this fabric. I very quickly just dragged and dropped this fabric from my fabric bin area to my garment on my 2D side. I could also do that to my 3D side, just dragging and dropping. I need to click this update 3D button. Remember, anytime you're adding or changing materials, click that button because that drape will be different. I do want to talk about a couple different ways we can add fabrics to our garment also. That drag and drop is going to be your simple easiest, but let's say you wanted to change majority of this garment to this single jersey, and you don't want to drag and drop it to every pattern piece. Up in our action tool section, right up here, we have a button called Assign. Assign is going to work like a paint bucket. So I'm able to click my Assign tool, and then I'm able to load in the single jersey to that paint bucket. So now anywhere I click, single jersey will be added. So I can click once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. You are also able to marquees select. So I can click in this background, select and drag, and you can see that material was now added to all 3 of those. Again, I need to click that Update 3D button, and it's going to update for me. Another way that you can add materials is going to be a replace feature. So a little different than that first replace feature, or that replace all. This one, I am able to select my material, this interlock fabric I manipulated, and I can drag it over top of the single jersey to where it says replace. And what that's going to do is it's going to replace everywhere that single jersey was now to that interlock fabric. And I could do the reverse of that, taking that single jersey, dragging over top and replacing. So a couple different ways that we can add our fabric. There is no right or wrong way, really just whatever working way works for you. Just remember you always need to click that update button because we do want the most accurate drape possible. Now to kind of clean up my garment, I'm going to change everything back to that Oxford shirting. So I can take that and drag and drop it over top to the replace. Clicking update, and I now have my garment originally how it was. The next section I'm going to talk about is our seams. So you can see that I have 2 seams applied. They're actually the same seam. They're the same single needle chain stitch, but one has a 1 next to it and one does not. Because there are 2 different single needles in here, there is a difference in them, and let's check it out. When I click on my single needle, on the right hand side of the extension menu, just like my fabrics, I have a bunch of different properties. I have the face and the back, or the front and the back of our seam. We can again change that transparency. But under here, under workmanship, I have an offset, which is going to be the distance the seam is applied from the edge of the garment, as well as the line count and the SPI and thread properties. So right now I can see that the offset of this first one is 0 and the line count is 1. When I toggle to the next one, I can see that the offset has changed to 0.157. So let's say in one area of my garment, I wanted the seam to be right on the edge, and the other part of my garment, I wanted the seam to be set, half an inch away, or in this case, 0.157 inches away. I would need to create a clone so that you have 2 different seams at 2 different offset property lengths. Now, in order to add a seam, maybe I now want, a double needle stitch going on this hem right here. I can do one of 2 things. I can use either a vector seam or a rasterized seam. If you're familiar with Illustrator, Illustrator is a vector-based system. Rasterized images are pixel-based. So rasterized is like Photoshop and vector is like Illustrator. Again, there's no right or wrong. It's really up to you and how you want your garment to look. I'll first show you the vector version. And to get to the vector version of the seams, you're going to go to this drop down right here under seams, and you're going to select what type of seam you want. So a new single needle, a new double needle, new flat lock, chain, zigzag, whatever you want. So I'll do the new double needle. It's then going to automatically appear right here for me. Now, in order to assign these seams, you're going to need to be on your assign tool and then loading it into your paint bucket. Unlike our fabric where I was just dragging and dropping it onto the pattern, we are applying these seams to a very specific edge of our garment. We don't want to misapply it, so we're going to be very precise using that assign tool, loading in that double needle. Now, before I assign it, I am going to change the color to red, just so that you can see these really brightly. And you can see my back didn't change. So when you are working with seams, be careful that if you do want your seam front and back to be matching, sometimes they're not linked. So you will need to also change the back color of that seam as well. So I have my double needle, zooming in on my edge, and I'm just clicking on the edge. And you can see in my 3D, I also have my double needle. When I select that, again, I can change the offset. increasing that, and you can see it's going further and further away from the edge of my garment. My line count right now is 2. I could click one more to make it 3. I could decrease it down to 1. I can also change the distance that this double needle is apart. And again, I can change the thread properties as well. The other type of seam that we can use is that rasterized seam. And the rasterized seam is going to be back in our Libraries tab under Seams and Trims. This is an image-based seam, so it's not a vector seam, it is pixel image-based. And I can find the double needle right here, and I can click that cloud to then download it. You can see it is downloading, and then I will need to go back to my Garment tab to utilize and add this seam. And I'm going to apply that the same way. I'm on my Assign tool, I'm selecting that, and I'm going to, let's apply it to this side seam so that we can see them right against each other. And for this, I'm actually going to, there we go right here. So I'm going to select it. I'm also going to make it red. This diffuse material, the color chip is like the fabric, so it's right here, versus the vector ones are right up top. And let's change that offset so that you can see it a little better as well. I'm going to do a few things just so that we can see the comparison of these seams a little more. I'm first going to hide my avatar. To hide my avatar, I'm going to right click on the avatar. I'm going to go hide. That way we can focus just on the garment a bit more. And then I'm going to reduce the texturing of this fabric just again so we can see the seams more. So going to the Oxford shirting, I'm going to decrease that normal map all the way down to 0 so that we don't see those textures go on. So with these different seams, there's not a huge difference, but you can see that they are a little bit different. Not only just the spacing and thickness, but you can just kind of see some shadowings a little bit different on the vector versus the rasterized seams. You're going to find when you work with 3D garments what your personal preference is and be able to kind of determine to use one or the other. I don't recommend using both. I recommend using either the rasterized or either the vector because you do want your garments to have some sort of consistency between them. Now, a few more things that we can do with these seams. If I switch to my texture tool, I am able to select the edge of that garment and then change where that seam ends or starts. So just kind of right here looking at it, I can pick the other side and I'm just kind of moving that seam along the edge. The other thing that I can do is when I'm on my select tool, if I select the corner point in my 2D pattern in which these seams are intersecting, my right side context menu gives me a corner seam alignment section. You have to be on the select tool to be able to do this, and you're going to see that I can have them overlap a couple different ways. I can create a cover stitch. I can also have them meet. So you can see that there's a few different ways I can line these up. It will default to overlapping, so just keep in mind that is part of the seams. The next section I want to talk about is artwork. So as I keep scrolling down in my materials, I can see I have an artwork section. Now this garment that I loaded from the cloud library does not have any artwork added, so I need to add my own artwork. To do that, I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to select Add Artwork. And in my downloads, I can click an artwork. And under the formats, you can see that there is a bunch of different formats that we can import. Note that any generic like PNG, JPEG, Illustrator file, Photoshop file, TIFF, you can import all of those and more. So I'm going to import a couple different artworks here. And I'm also going to import an all-over print, or maybe a print that I want to create into an all-over print, so that we can kind of show how we can create prints as well. So starting with artworks, I'm going to kind of zoom out just so we can reset our view here. And I'm actually going to change my background also. I can probably bet it's a little hard for you to see this white garment and this white background. So if I go under 3D environment, and I go under environments here, I have different backgrounds I can choose, and I'm going to select a dark gray just so there's a little more contrast for you to see. To add my artwork, I can do it any way I did my fabric. So I can drag and drop, or I can use the assign tool. I'm just going to drag and drop. You can see my artwork came in huge. So we're going to rescale this artwork. A few different ways we can do it. When I select the artwork from the 2D window or the 3D window, my right-hand side gives me a transformation box. In this transformation box, my artwork is linked. So if I change the width, the height will automatically proportionately change. So I can change that width, let's say to 6 inches, and my height is going to proportionally change. If I don't know a specific size I want my artwork, I can utilize my 3D gizmo. If it does not auto appear for you, the gizmo is right here, this button underneath my pen tool to turn it on and off. And the gizmo, when I drag or click and drag one of these 4 corners, allows me to scale it bigger or smaller. I can also rotate it with that black circle in the center, changing the positioning of this. So let's drag it to make it a little smaller. I'm just going to place it in the center here. Now, when I click on the artwork in my 2D or my 3D window, I'm getting that transformation box, and I'm also getting this actions box. Anytime you're clicking on it from a window that you're working in, you're going to get things you can change about your artwork as far as the positioning of it, the rotation. This magic mirror section here allows me to clone the material and shape, or clone and rotate it. This is a symmetric artwork, so it's not going to really show anything being rotated. You can also change it to an overprint, which I'll get to shortly here, and then you can change the order. So if I had multiple artworks stacked, just like Photoshop layers, I can bring it all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom, or just changing it from the top or the bottom of whichever one is in front. So that's going to be selecting it from your 2D or 3D workspace. If you select it from your Materials tab, so clicking on it, just like your fabric, you have the different visual properties. So I can see the face of my artwork, the back of my artwork. We have a different material mode. So the PBR is where we're able to manually change all of these maps. And then we also have some beautiful substance executions. So these are going to be presets. So maybe I wanted this artwork to be glittery. I can take and select that preset. And when I zoom in, I think maybe because it's gray, you're not seeing it too much. Let's change the color here. And let's recolor. There we go. So you can see that I'm changing that into a glitter execution. Let's do a foil print. There is a puff print. So you can see there's a lot of really great executions if you don't want to manually mess around in that PBR section and changing your own different elements of your artwork. A couple great features you can use, though, if you aren't super familiar with PBR maps, are these 2 checkboxes here. So I have my artwork right here. Is lower layer maps and auto generate maps. I just realized I still removed that texture from the shirt, so I'm going to bring that back so that we can really show you a good example about how these checkboxes work. So in my artwork, there is use lower layer maps, which is actually going to take the maps from this shirt and apply it to my artwork. So when I click that, you can see it looks like that the artwork execution on this is actually printed into this fabric, or more of like a sublimation process versus just being more of a screen print when I uncheck it. There is also auto generate depth maps, and when I check that, you can see it looks more like it's popping out. With this, you do just want to tweak that normal map. Sometimes it comes on a little too strong, but that's going to kind of give you that pop out effect. So depending on which one you may need for an artwork execution, these are 2 very simple checkboxes that you can use and not having to really mess with any of the other maps. So I'd recommend either those ones, or under this material mode, switching the PBR to substance and just using some of their preset executions. So that is going to be a little bit with artwork. In this diffuse box, you are able to edit your images as well. You do need to have Photoshop or Illustrator loaded into your preference. I will make a different video kind of going over our preferences and how to set those up, how I set mine up personally, so that you can know a little bit more about that. So I had my first artwork there. Let's say I add my second artwork. There's bugs right there. Again, I can use that order to order all the way down. I can drag it on top, kind of moving them. And then if I ever want to delete an artwork, you just select it and hit backspace or delete on your keyboard. So selecting it, backspace or delete. Now I do want to show you guys how we can create an all over print. I am going to select my artwork and drag and drop it onto my garment. Now this artwork specifically kind of has this white bounding box around it, and I want to crop the image just so that I'm seeing the artwork. One thing that we can do in our diffuse area by selecting our artwork from our toolbox, selecting diffuse, is I am able to change the bounding box of this artwork without going into Illustrator or Photoshop. I can just click those sections and I can crop these images. So you can see I have a nice clean image here. Let's drag it down a little bit. I can take that also. Let's use the lower layer maps feature so that we're getting that texture of the fabric coming through. And then I want to make this into an all over print. To make it into an all over print, I need to select it from my workspace. And then on the right hand side under actions, clicking all over print. When I click that, you can see I'm now getting this replace option saying, do you want to replace the old Oxford shirting with a new group? So this is going to be a group every time you do the all over print using the all over print button, because it's taking the fabric underneath and pairing it with the artwork that you have applied. If I click that replace all button, it's going to update. So everywhere that Oxford shirting was now has my print. And in my fabric area, you can see I now have this group, and the group is the only one with the gray check mark because that group is the only one that's applied. When I click that group, I can see I have my print, so the one shown up here, and I also have the Oxford shirting. Only one pair of physics is being used, and that is going to be the shirting. So you can see that the orange ball is correlating to the orange ball of the physics. The artwork has no physics properties to itself. I can actually still go into that diffuse though and crop this image if I didn't crop it exactly how I wanted it last time. So you can see my repeat prints a little bit better that way. I can change the scale. Maybe I want it 200%. I can click out of it. I can also change the transparency. Maybe I don't want that print to be as shown there. I can also use my texture tool as well. So when I select that texture tool, I can zoom out, and with this print, I can actually drag the placement of where this print is shown. So if I want it to be lined up, I can find that specific area that this print would go to line up. So it's looking right about there. So I'm lining that up to center front. I can also use the gizmo to shrink the print. Maybe I want the scale to be different. Maybe I want to rotate the print. And again, moving it. So that texture tool right up here under your actions is going to change the placement of where that print may go. So that's just a little bit about our artworks and our prints. There's a couple different ways we can create prints. This is just one method that's very simple. I definitely recommend because you do have that group there. It's a little easier to see. And you know, later lessons, later videos will go about the other 500 ways to do things. Just like all softwares, there's a lot of different ways of working in them. And again, no correct way. You're going to get the feel for it as you learn, as you build garments, as you design them. And there, again, no right way. You can do it whichever way you want, and a bunch of different ways to do it. Now, the next section I want to talk about is trims. So we do have some buttons applied to our shirt. And like I've been doing in the others, I am going to actually change it back to just that plain white shirting by dragging that fabric over top and replacing it, just so that it's a little easier for you to see while I'm going through the trim portion. So currently I have buttons assigned to my garment, and I'm going to show you how we can assign them ourselves. So a fun feature with all of these materials is if you want to remove all of the buttons or you want to remove all of the seams, when you hover over them in your toolbox, there is this minus sign. The minus sign will allow you to remove them from all instances. So we're not going to delete them from our whole file, but when I click that minus, you can see that they're removed from my garment. I then get an X to then delete it if I really want to delete from my toolbox. So I'm just going to click those minuses. I'm going to click that Update 3D, and you're going to see that that garment now comes apart a bit so that you can kind of see just the fabric, how it is without any buttons. Clicking the finish, and I am going to actually apply a different color fabric so that you can see one side versus the other when I am assigning them. The way we do our buttons is going to be under Piece Assignable. Now, I already have buttons downloaded in this file, but if the file you're working in does not have buttons, we can download them from our Libraries tab. Selecting the Libraries tab here, you can either select them from the Seams and Trims area, so I can see I have a bunch of buttons here. I can click the download on one of these buttons, or there's also a YKK library, so you can see there's a bunch of buttons and zippers and stuff in there as well. Toggling back to my garment, I can see I have my button. This flat button is the one I downloaded. And to assign it, I'm going to select my Assign tool, clicking on my button, and then there's going to be three parts to this. There's the buttonhole, and then the stitch. So these are smart buttons that will allow us to button and unbutton automatically. There's like a button you check, but it's nothing like you don't have to add stitching and all these other extra things to it. The stitch is added within this smart button. So three things we're adding. So I'm going to find my placement. I recommend doing this on the 2D side, although you can still do it on the 3D side. And I'm going to click once and release my mouse. Dragging my mouse, I see this cyan blue colored line, and that's the stitch. The purple dot that appears is going to be the symmetric spot to place my buttonhole. So I'm just going to click on that purple dot, release my mouse, and I have a button and a buttonhole. I do need to click this Update 3D button so that the button now dresses on there. Clicking Finish, and I now have my button and buttonhole applied to my garment. Just like all of my other materials, there is various properties I can get to by clicking on either my button in my toolbox here or clicking on my button in my 2D or 3D workspace. To do either of these, I do want to switch back to my Select tool. If I stay on Assign, I'm just going to be adding a bunch more buttons. So I'm going to switch to Select. And we're first going to look at the properties when I click on my button in my 2D or 3D workspace. On the right-hand side, I can see I have transformation as well as actions. So transformation is going to allow me to change the position and rotation, and actions is going to allow me to unbutton this, flip it, move it to the inside, see it on different size sets, as well as changing the order. So the first one, if I uncheck unbuttoned, you can see the little button rolls away. And when I click Update, my button is unbuttoning. If I change flip under the position, it's going to change where the button and buttonhole are. If I move it to the inside, the button is going to be moved to the inside of the garment. And you can see that this 2D workspace flipped to the inside view. So I'm going to move it to the outside so that we can see that. If I want it to be rebuttoned, I just check that button again, click Update 3D, and it's going to rebutton it. And because I flipped the sides, you can see that now the white side is being buttoned over top of the gray. I'm going to uncheck the unbuttoned one more time just so that we can see that, and flip the positioning. Now you might notice if you don't really have a super high-powered computer, or even mine, it's a pretty good computer, you're getting a little bit of jumping going on in your simulation. These buttons are 3D objects. So this is a traditionally modeled 3D hard button. We're adding a 3D object on top of another giant 3D object. So it's a lot going on your computer. Just know, be patient. Look into upgrading your machine if you're having a lot of issues. but this is a lot of work on your computer. So please be kind to your computers, be kind to yourselves, be patient. This process of 3D trims tends to be one of the trickier ones when it comes to computer power. Let's say, for example, though, that I want to add a couple more buttons. So I want to create a couple clones. If I want to create some clones, under this Actions area, there's a button that says Clone by Offset. When I click that, I can choose the spacing either in the X or the Y, so horizontal or vertical, as well as how many copies. I want to clone them in the Y, going up and down, and I want to create, let's say, 2 copies. One thing about our 3D workspace is that our Y is actually flipped. Our up is going to be negative and our down is going to be positive. It's based on how our camera is viewing things. If I'm going up, my garment is actually going down, and if I'm viewing down, my garment is going up. So just know that the logic of the Y is flipped. So I want to create a couple copies going down, so I'm going to do a positive Y value. And this is going to be the spacing of the buttons apart. So if I want them 2 inches apart, I'll type in 2. And if I want 2 copies, I'll type in 2 and click Apply. And you can see it's created 2 copies going down 2 inches apart. Now if I click Dress, you can see they're being added there. And I can choose to actually button these individually. Maybe I want just 2 of them buttoned and I want the third to be unbuttoned. I can do that. I can pick the third, check it to be buttoned, and rebutton it there. Now that we've covered the actions of these buttons, we can go ahead and cover the visualization of these buttons. So when I select the button from the toolbox, the right side menu is giving me all of the visual properties. So I can change the button color itself, changing them to red. I could change the thread color itself, let's make them purple, and the buttonhole, let's make the buttonhole green. So you can see I've changed all of them individually. Note that all 3 of these buttons are changing because this is one material added. If I wanted a button that was a different color than all of these, I would need to download another button, or I could click this drop down and I could clone the button, make this one, let's say pink, and then I could assign this pink button separately. So going back to the red one, if I didn't want them multicolored, I could check single color, and it's going to change all of my elements to one single color. I can also change the transparency. Maybe I want the buttons to be a little transparent, or the thread. And you can also change the diffuse. So maybe you have a printed button. I could select that, and let's just pick one of my prints here. And you can see that print is now added onto the button. So maybe you have like an eggshell or a turtle shell, different types of buttons you can add just by going to that diffuse and adding in an image. And let's change that there so you can see it a little bit better. And that's going to be some of the visual properties of our buttons. We can also add zippers. So I'm going to show us how we can add our zipper as well, but I'm going to remove my buttons again by using that minus sign. To get to my zipper, I need to go to my libraries. And I'm just going to stay under the seams and trims, and I'm going to download, let's just do this metal zipper here. Clicking the download, I do need to go back now to my garment tab to actually utilize that zipper. You can see it was placed under a different category as well. Our buttons are piece assignable trims, and our zippers are edge assignable trims. The difference is a piece assignable trim is being added on top of a pattern piece, and an edge assignable trim is being added to the edge of our pattern piece. So just like in real life, our zippers are being sewn into a seam or the edge of a fabric, and that is how our 3D is doing it as well. And we need to decide which edges are being applied with the zipper. So for me, I am going to just apply it to this center seam right here, or the center edge of this fabric. I do not want to apply it to my collar for this example. I'm just going to kind of give a quick demo. To do this, I need to go to my Assign tool. I need to scroll down and find my zipper, loading it into my garment. And then I need to check a button that's called Manual Assignment. Manual assignment is allowing me to select the specific segments that the zipper is going to be assigned to. So when I click that box, it's going to look very similar to my multi-stitch tool. So if you watched my last video of stitching, this multi-stitch is showing us an arrow of which direction in which seam we're assigning it to. So I'm going to click once, my arrow is going down, you can see part of my zipper assigned, and then I need to switch to the to column. So it's from one edge, switching to the other edge, and I'm going to click down on the other edge of my garment, making sure my arrow is going the same direction. We don't want one arrow going up and one arrow going down. We want both arrows going down. And then I can click the done button. So even though I'm not assigning the zipper to multiple edges, kind of like that multi-stitch logic, we are very specifically telling the software which seams we want to assign to. So when I click done, I'm going to do the dress button to update this 3D. And the fabric might, take a few minutes to kind of even itself out there. And this is a big zipper, so we're going to change some of the elements as well once this finishes simulating. So I can see my zipper pull is getting added there. So I'm going to click the finish button, and then we are going to get into some of the other elements. At this point, I'm starting to probably sound quite repetitive, but materials are repetitive. A lot of the same actions or same places you click will get similar menus. So again, when I am on my select tool and I select my zipper from my 2D or my 3D workspace, I have actions. In this actions area, I can change my zipper width, which is going to be the zipper tape. So this is a very thick zipper. If I want to decrease it, I just select it. Let's do 0.3. Clicking the dress button, and you can see that zipper tape is almost invisible because I've made it so small. Under the zipped portion, I can choose to unzip this garment a certain percentage by changing the percentage in this box right here. Let's do 90, clicking dresser update, or I can also unzip it using this slider. You can see my garment is going crazy right now. It looks like some of the fabric is getting in the way. That's okay. I'm just going to do this prepare button, popping it back into prepare. And just like we learned in our last lesson, I'm going to pull these apart a little bit. What's happening is, again, because this is a 3D trim, it's getting caught in the fabric, so I just want to give it a little more space while it's simulating. So you can see it's looking a lot nicer. A lot of 3D is problem solving. So I'm going back to my select, going to my zipper right here. Clicking it from my zipper section here. I can change the direction as well, just like my buttons. I can make the pull be on the inside or the outside. I can change the positioning. We can zip it all the way unzipped if we want, clicking update. Take a few minutes for the garment to update for me right there. You can always do a re-prepare and redress if you're not liking how your simulation is turning out. See, that looks a bit nicer when I redress it fully. So that's all of the visual properties you can do with that zipper. You can also pull the slider from the 3D or the 2D, completely up to you. If I select it from my toolbox now, I get all the different elements of colors I can change. So again, I can do the single color or individually recolor everything. I can also change transparencies of things. And we can zoom in, we can update if we want to see the full garment simulate. And that's how we're going to assign a zipper to our garment. I used it just from the basic library, but again, there's a YKK library as well if you do have a very specific zipper that you would like to apply. The last thing I want to talk about in our material section is going to be our color libraries. So our color libraries can be accessed here at the very bottom or in any of your materials. So how I was recoloring things is I was selecting the material, I was going to the color chip, I was selecting something from the picker, but in any of these sections, when you hover over, you can also change the color chip you can see on that left side, and we can change the color that way as well. And then you can also just drag and drop color chips onto your garment as well if you want to recolor something. and it will create a copy. So I now have an Oxford shirting that's red still, and then one that's pink. So a few different ways to do that. What I mainly want to talk about though is how we can import color palettes. So if you don't want to be using that color picker and you want a color library, you can either export them from Photoshop and Illustrator if you want to create your own custom palette, or there's this wonderful website that I use all the time called icolorpalette.com. At icolorpalette.com, you can see that there is different themed, so maybe here is a bunch of flower themed artwork. Just ignore all of the ads. And maybe I want this color palette. I can hover over and click this download options, and there is a Photoshop ACO file or an Illustrator ASE. It does not matter which one you use, you just need to select one of them, clicking the download button, and it will be added to your computer's downloads section. I can then minimize that, and I can add that into my color palette area by clicking this tiny plus sign up here under libraries, going to my downloads, finding that palette and clicking open. Once I do that, it is going to load for me right here, and I can see I have my color palette. And I can just, again, drag and drop those if I want to recolor things, or I can also click this drop down and toggle between different color palettes I've downloaded. So you can see I have a bunch here. You can also go under all libraries and see all of the different color palettes you have downloaded. I'm right now in a grid view, but you can also switch to a list view if you want to see the color names. Unfortunately, at this moment, you can't rename colors in the software system. So it is important if you are creating your own palettes in Illustrator and Photoshop that you are naming those colors within that software before exporting. If I wanted to, let's say, create a color, so here's my Oxford shirting, and I'm in the picker and I create this specific blue, and I love this purplish blue color, and I don't want to lose it. You are able to create custom color palettes within your specific file, but it won't be saved in your software. So if I just want to reuse this purple again, maybe I want to use it on the zipper. When I'm in my picker, I can just click that plus sign and dock it into this box here. Then if I go to my zipper, scrolling all the way down here, I can click that chip and it's saved in that custom color palette area. So that's kind of a shortcut if you do create colors just within that picker. I recommend, finding a way of either creating your own, another video that I can do later on in these series of creating in Photoshop and Illustrator, or using that icolorpalette.com. That's a great website. And you can actually create palettes from images on that site too. You can import an image and they actually pick the colors in the hues from that, which is great.
Great job today, guys. I hope you learned a lot. Stay tuned for the next video as we cover 3D styling